Hi there.
Hi, Sadi. Thanks for joining.
Hi.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining in tonight. My name's Tracy Timmer, and I'm the Public Programs Manager here at the Walt Disney Family Museum. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Maya Colbert, who's our Public Programs Coordinator. And thank you so much for joining us for this virtual program, Behind the Scenes of Self, with director Sadi Huluf and producer Eric Rosales. And we're going to start out this evening with a screening of the short, which can also be viewed on Disney Plus. Sadi and Eric will follow the screening with a presentation taking us behind the scenes of the making of Self, and afterwards we'll be handing it over to you, the audience, to submit questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom platform. So please be sure to submit all questions to the Q&A section, which should be at the bottom middle of your Zoom screen. We won't be answering any questions in the chat function. Also, please note, due to time constraints, we may not get a chance to get to everyone's questions at the end, but we'll get to as many as we can. So please do not submit your question multiple times. This program will be reposted within our members only portal a few days following this live airing, as well as on our Facebook and YouTube pages for 48 hours. If you'd like permanent access to recordings of our free virtual programming, we invite you to join as a member today. And now to introduce our very special guest. Sadi Huluf was born and raised in Los Angeles and studied at UCLA's School of Theater, Film, and Television. She began working in production management at Pixar after graduating and relocated to the Bay Area. She has since worked as a production coordinator on The Incredibles 2 and Turning Red, as well as several Pixar Spark Shorts films. She's directed numerous short narrative and documentary films, such as The Gamers, Exploring Blackness, 19th Amendment Doc, and Buna. Most recently, she directed the Pixar Spark short Self, which of course is what we're here to discuss today. Producer Eric Rosales began his career as an American Red Cross representative before working in freelance live film production. He joined Pixar in 2004 as a rendering coordinator on The Incredibles, and he has since worked as a manager in many departments, including sets, lighting, art, and effects. He has worked on the feature films Coco, Toy Story 4, and Lightyear, and most recently served as producer of Self. Thanks so much for joining us today, Sadi and Eric, and welcome. And I'll
Thanks
pass
Thank
so
you
it
for
back.
much. Thanks for
having
the invite.
us. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I think first things first, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna play the film first, and then we'll jump into the into our little keynote and show and tell. So that sounds good, everyone. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. We'll kick off the film.
Yay.
Hey. Um, yeah, well, thanks everyone for taking a look at our movie. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you for all the nice comments. It's really helpful. Feel free to keep commenting as we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know we have a Q&A after too, but yeah. Shall we begin?
Yeah, let's do it. All right, I'll jump into it. Let's go. Maybe. Okay, here we go. There we go.
Yes, we wanted to start with introductions. Even though we had our bio read, just want to talk more about ourselves. Yeah, I was born in LA, raised there. I went to UCLA Film School studying stop motion and screenwriting. And, I grew up in LA to a single mother, and I didn't have any access to entertainment or Hollywood, and really came out of curiosity. So the idea of me coming to Pixar to make the short film has kind of just been like a, you know, very grateful experience. So that's me.
Yeah, I grew up in Southern California as well, in the San Fernando Valley, which is just north of Los Angeles. And as I was growing up, loved Star Wars. Still love Star Wars. It's my favorite thing in the whole wide world. I always joke that all I wanted to be was a Jedi, and pretty much till this day, I still want to be a Jedi. So yeah, I'm still practicing, still trying to move those rocks. But yeah, otherwise, I just because of these movies, the love of storytelling just kind of influenced me, and I just wanted to stay doing that for the rest of my life. I was like, I want to tell stories, I want to make movies. So that's what I kind of set out to do. And it led me to the University of California at Santa Cruz, where I studied as a film and digital media major until 2000, where I graduated. Then I bounced around in the Bay Area, doing live action work, TV show stuff, commercials, and was doing archiving and all kinds of stuff up until 2004 when I joined Pixar as the rendering coordinator on The Incredibles. So before we get into Self, I'll tell you a little bit about a crash course on how we make our movies at Pixar. So we have this thing called the Pixar pipeline, and that's what's up on the screen right now. And so basically what it is every single film that we make at Pixar goes to this pipeline. And from start to finish, it takes roughly about 4 to 6 years for us to make a feature film at Pixar. And this pipeline encompasses roughly 13 departments. And each department is made up of artists, technical directors, and production staff. And then those folks are led by technical supervisors, and then they're also led by a department manager like myself. So the technical supervisors, they handle things like all the artistic, all the visual, all the technology, everything you see up on the screen, where the department managers, they handle all the behind the scenes stuff like budgeting, priorities, budgets and schedules and all that other kind of stuff. So with every movie, we basically try and learn as much as we possibly can so that we can learn how to work smarter and not harder.
So, as you know, Pixar doesn't only just make feature films. And I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but the last couple of short films that have been coming out of Pixar have been from our Spark Shorts program, which is kind of like a unique program where like it kind of gives folks in all parts of the studio, like technical directors, like prod management, like me, a chance to make a short film. And if you're selected to do it, they also give you this kind of like this like expansive like resource to do it. And it doesn't always have to be CG. It could be 2D, it could be stop motion like this one. So I love it because this program allows me to tell like a very small personal story about like an immigrant African woman. And I think that like I wouldn't have any other like option to make this short film unless I had this Spark Shorts program. And that's where Self comes in, to be honest. So self is short for self-sabotage. The story kind of it's about a wooden doll who desperately wants to fit in, and she makes a, ill-fated wish upon a shooting star, kind of sparking this journey of self-discovery, as you guys have seen. This story is a hybrid stop-motion CG film, and I kind of just want to take a moment to talk about like the personal elements of this film. And there's two major ones. The first one is like my own struggling to belong. Again, self is short for self-sabotage, and like, there's been multiple times in my life where I've only been like the only woman or the only Black person in the room, and whenever I am like the oddball out of this whole group of people, I will play this game in my head of like, how much of myself could I hide to perfectly conform and fit in to be like everyone else. But what I didn't realize was like I kind of was like suffering the consequences of like losing who I am as a person and self-sabotaging myself in the process of doing that. The second inspiration, like my mother's immigration story to the US. When my mom moved to Los Angeles, it wasn't, it wasn't the real big, like making the American dream. It was more out of survival. There was a civil war in Ethiopia. She literally had to leave her home country to just survive. So when she came to America, she was having a hard time just like belonging herself because she didn't speak English and she didn't look like anyone else. And to this day, my mom still kind of has her own, journey of self-discovery and who she is. But those are kind of like the two main nuggets of inspiration of self. So one of the first things we did when making the film is start with art. Since I wanted to really kind of highlight my Ethiopian heritage, I wanted the character to look Ethiopian. So we looked at some Ethiopian women and we started with some 2D sketches. And then slowly started to get into like, like more of like the digital space and doing like digital art.
Yeah, and then we moved on to creating clay sculptures of self. So basically what we were doing here is we wanted to create a clay sculpture so we could see her in the real world. So we had a chance to look at her from all different angles. We had a chance to put her under different kinds of lighting setups so we could just see what kind of look she was going to have when we were trying to bring her to life. And so from there, we would make notes on her facial features, and then we would call out where we needed to make any kind of adjustments. And you can see some of the notes that we made there up on the screen. And then since we needed Self to be both a digital model and a stop motion puppet, we had to come up with the design and review process that we could accomplish simultaneously. And that was a really, really interesting challenge because it required us to work very differently than what we normally do. So that Pixar pipeline that I showed you earlier, that kind of had to get tossed out the window because we had to learn how to like, all right, how are we going to do this digitally and physically? And we're going to have to kind of take some steps forward and go backwards and then make some adjustments and then move forward again and go backwards, make adjustments. So it was a lot of back and forth, but it was a really interesting challenge. And you can kind of see what our thought process was here in the review process. So it was kind of a chicken and egg situation, as you can kind of tell.
Yeah, and to kind of really start our blueprint for the physical puppet construction, we started with like a digital model of Self. Now, I think when you guys saw the film, this is great. Usually when we show the film, we're like, oh, we don't know who saw it or not, but you guys saw it. So you guys know this is a silent film. There's no dialogue. And we knew that like Self's design was really important because that's how she's going to communicate, connect with the audience. And one of the big things that I really care about was her eye shape because Ethiopian women have like these iconic almond eye-shaped eyes, and I really want to make sure we had that for her. And you can see in the actual like CG model, there are draw overs, and as us again really want to be very specific and focus a lot of time in how she looked in the design. And we also look at her feet and her hair and her hands. We looked at everything. We were like, we want to make sure that we are like creating authentic Ethiopian woman. Another like proud thing like about this film is that like in Ethiopian cultures, depending on which tribe you are, there's like a lot of like tattoos to represent specifically the tribe you are in Ethiopia. So I'm from Tigray and I really want to show that specific kind of like markings on Self. So we actually had wood carvings on her. And if you notice in the film, she has like a cross on her chest, 2 11s next to her eye to represent she's from the Tigray region, and then also 3 rings around her neck. Now, Seltzer was a really unique challenge for us because Ethiopian women have a very distinct style, which is like tight braids up top and a big poof in the back. And I was kind of, for a while she was starting to look like Medusa and I wasn't having it. And I was like, you guys, it's just this is not what Ethiopian women look like. And so what our VFX supervisor, Nathan, did, he actually pulled out his phone, 3D scanned my own hair, and put it into the CG model. And literally, I approved it. It was so like, it just like was so great. And it's also a really fun fact that like Self's hair is literally my hair. So that was a really great kind of like design challenge that we were going through. But then another element to that was just like, because of how big the hair is, we were trying to figure out like, what's the best way to kind of build our hair? Is it going to be one big piece or is it going to be broken up? Because some of the stop motion animators really wanted to be able to move her hair. Do we attach it to the hair or should it be something that is separate? And what kind of material is it going to be? Because we don't want it to be too heavy where it weighs down the puppet and makes it like drop. If you could see here, we have to lean in probably a little more, but you could kind of see that like Self's like wooden grain texture. Now we were trying to explore different types of wooden puppets and dolls for the film because again in the film she's a wooden doll and I'll explain why she is later in the presentation. But the way that I really want to show was like I really want to show all of her imperfections. I wanted to see the grain. I want to feel the roughness of her skin. So some questions we were talking about was like, is she going to be stained or is she going to be polished? Like will she have some cracks in her? We also did like more wood grain tests because again, like we wanted to make sure that like Self design kind of makes the audience lean forward and we didn't want to have too much grain where we kind of like don't see the face versus we don't want too much where she kind of looks like plastic. Here's like an example of like a character model packet, which is basically when the art department hands it off to the characters team to actually build the puppet. So when we were design ready, you can see here on the left, ew, disgusting, Medusa hair. And then you see on the right, oh my God, beautiful. Wow, we want that kind of hairstyle. These are kind of like an instruction guide to our puppet and characters team of how to build Self.
So from there, then we decided to take all that work and we went over to our friends over at Tippett Studio, and they're located over in Berkeley, California. So, not just around the corner from us. And so Tippett Studio is it was started by Phil Tippett. And if anything about stop motion, you know what a legend Phil Tippett is. And we were just over the moon and super excited to work with him and all his people over there. And this incredible group of people came together, and they're just amazing artists, and they were really our partners in the making of the film. They were with us all the way throughout the making. They handled the building of the self puppet and the stop motion animation portion. And so to kind of give you a little bit more background on Phil, he's really well known for his work on the original Star Wars trilogy. So when I met him, I kind of fanboyed out a little bit because I was like, dude, you're my hero. So to give you that reference, the Hoth sequence with the AT-AT walkers going across the snow and Empire Strikes Back, that was all stop motion animation that was hand done by Phil himself. So it was really exciting to kind of get so much knowledge and learn so much from him. And so to kind of give you a little bit of a sneak peek at how we partnered with Tippett, I'll show you this quick little clip.
The great thing about Pixar is that people love to work on new and experimental projects. We let people know like, hey, we're making a stop motion film, do you want to help? But we also knew that we didn't have all the skill sets to make a stop motion film, so we actually contacted Tippett Studios in Berkeley, California to help us make this film.
The stop motion element plays into the story.
In the film, Self is the only thing that's stop motion versus everything around her is CG.
We wanted to accentuate the difference between a stop motion puppet and a CG character. CG characters move differently, they have a different kind of flow, where a stop motion puppet, she looks different. This puppet was yearning to become this smoother character.
All right, so what's the process of building a stop motion puppet? It takes roughly about 3 to 4 months to build a single stop motion puppet. So that means it requires a lot of patience, requires a lot of trial and error, and it requires a whole lot of collaboration. You have to be in lockstep, and everyone has to be on the same page and on the same team. So the overall process, there's really 4 big steps. So the first one is grayscale puppet, then it goes to armature construction, then fabrication, and then finishing. So for the grayscale puppet, what you're basically doing is you're creating a fully 3D printed model. It's a physical model of the puppet. It's not the final model. But what this type of model does is it allows you to kind of see how the puppet is being put together, what it looks like in its most basic form. And this allows you to kind of start determining, okay, how high, what's the height that we need? What's the width that we need to have with the puppet? And you start to kind of figure out, all right, where do we need the joints to be so our puppet can perform things that we need it to do in the film? And when we kind of did all these things, we settled at the fact that Self needed to be a 12-inch tall puppet. And then we moved into armature construction. And armature construction involves the creation of the internal skeleton of the puppet. So think of like the skeleton of the Terminator, just this metal skeleton kind of inside. And so these armatures are super highly engineered pieces of work, and they are all crafted by hand, and they really just determine how your puppet can and can't move. So you'll kind of see in that big center photo, there's this device that's right behind it. That's called an armature arm. And what you do is you plug that armature arm in and you hook it up to the puppet, and it allows your puppet to kind of be always standing up straight and steady. And then it allows you to kind of manipulate the puppet and figure out what you need to do for it. So basically, the more complex your armature is, the more complex movements your puppet can perform. So before we can get into any of the stuff that you see, like the printing of the body parts or anything like that, we actually had to digitally build every single body part and make sure that they were properly designed so that they could fit properly onto that armature.
And once that was figured out, that's when fabrication comes in. So fabrication is basically kind of us putting all those body parts together, the ones that fit, and we did all the testing. And this is kind of like where we start seeing Self come alive. And like, if you see on the keynote, sorry if I lean in like this, I'm just like, if you see, but there's like screws and kind of like tools there where the animators use to kind of tighten and loosen the puppet as they need. Because again, like, our animators, me as a director, my animator is my actor, my actress. So they're the ones really acting out everything. And they really need to know, like, how tight should she be? Like, is she moving like really loosely, or is she more rigid? I love this photo because the guy on the white is Matt Majors. He was our animation supervisor. And then Gibby, who's Tom Gibson, he's our stop motion animator. You can see right there, he started to already just start playing and manipulating Self to see like who she is by just her movement. Some other fun things about Self is that like her eyes were custom made. So we actually worked with like a very specific manufacturer that just makes dolls like eyes for stop motion puppets. And it was really funny because when we got the box from them, it was like a bunch of eyeballs staring back at us. And as you can notice in the film, Self, the way that we change her expressions through face replacement. So we have 9 pieces of her face just constantly going in and out in the film to kind of show her range of expressions. And I like showing the middle photo a lot, not because Self is naked, but this is an example of like, our animators had a moment to, maneuver her, play with her. And then one of the things they notice is that like, hey, we're having a hard time moving Self's hand going from here to here. There's just not enough range of motion. So the way that we kind of compromise to help that is actually cut out more of her shoulder area so that our animators could get that range of motion. So if you can see in the middle folder, there's like this huge gap between like the bolt of the shoulder and her chest. And again, that's all because our animators were playing with her and needed more motion from her. I'm very proud of this photo. If you see her hands right there, each of her fingers has a wire in it so they could individually bend them down, which is really nice and specific, and also very, very like tedious, like small animation details you won't see, but I just love.
Yeah, so basically at this point, we're also not just working on the puppet, we're also building all the surrounding stuff. So we're doing things like we created concrete slabs out of foam core. And we did this because when we were shooting Self and her motions across the screen, we wanted her to be walking on a physical substance. We wanted to have her on a physical platform so that she was feeling more physically connected to the world and not just kind of floating as she was being adjusted into her digital world. And then we're also at this stage kind of selecting her hair and skin tone color as well. And we did that by going to a local hardware store, and we would go and get a bunch of paint samples, and then we would compare and see like, okay, what colors complement each other the best, so that we could figure out, okay, what's the skin tone, what's going to be the hair tone, all this other stuff. The kind of funny story about this is we had a really tight timeline, and we always had to keep moving forward. We always kept moving forward. And unfortunately, during one of the weeks, Saudi had come down with COVID. So we're like, oh man, okay, well, we how do we keep moving? How do we keep going forward? And we got to get some things approved. And so we're like, all right, got an idea. Go over to the workshop, grab a box, put all these little heads that you see on the screen here, put them in a box, drive over to Sadi's house, knock on her door, leave a box of heads on her doorstep, and then run away from her door and just like, hey, there's heads on your door. It's not weird, but okay, it's kind of weird. And she got them, brought them in, and then we set them up. We set up a Zoom meeting, and we just went through and we watched her kind of go through her progression of each model and like figure out, okay, this is the skin tone I want for here. This is the hair tone. So it was great. It allows us to keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also did tests where we were comparing the physical puppet side by side with the digital model. And the reason why we were doing this is because if we were ever in a position where we needed to cut from a shot from the physical puppet over to the digital model, we wanted to have them match as close as possible so that it would be a seamless transition that the audience wouldn't even notice.
So once we like decided what the color is going to be on Self, we could finally start kind of really talking about just like how she's going to physically look in the space and do some actual animation tests, which is like the most like fun part of making an animated film.
So, oh, wait, there he goes. There you go. All right. I'll give you a super, super fast like explanation of how you do stop motion. All right. So basically, let's use this pen if you can see my tiny little box here. All right, so this pen is your character. And what stop motion animation is it's animation that is captured one frame at a time using a physical object that is moved in between each frame. So if this is your character, you set up a camera, then you take a picture of it, and then you slightly move this little thing, and then you take another picture, and you slightly move it again, and you take another picture, and you repeat this process over and over and over again until you connect enough frames. And then when you collect those frames, you play them back at a speed of 24 frames a second, and then it makes the character appear to move on its own across the screen. So it's really, really creative. It's really, really fun and charming, but it is also an extremely time-intensive process, and it requires a whole lot of attention to detail. So some of those animation tests that Saudi was talking about, I'm going to play 2 of them for you. So this first one is all about self-facial expressions. All right, so I'll play it one more time and see if you can pick up when the facial expression changes. And you also get to see a floating head on a stick. All right. And this second one, this is actually my personal favorite test that we did. So this one focuses on the lighting and also on Self's hand. I'll do that one more time. So super cool. You get to see how the armature arm kind of holds up the puppet. And if you look really closely, particularly around the hip area, you can actually see inside of Self, and you can see how the armature is connected to all the body parts, which is really neat.
Finally, homegirl has some clothes on. So fabrication, after we have finalized, the body parts, what color paint she's going to be for skin tones and all of her movements, no more needing to cut out body parts, we could put clothes on her. Again, going back to wanting to give a shout out to my Ethiopian heritage, we looked at Ethiopian clothing and just patterns for the design of her look. And if you notice in the film, she's wearing a crop top, and the reason why is because I love wearing crop tops. Here's some a little kind of fun things that I like to tell people. So going back to her hair, remember we were asking ourselves, is it gonna be one big piece, multiple pieces? So we decided to break it up to 3 pieces. And in the photo on the left, you can kind of see the pieces right there. The middle photo just shows all of her additional body parts. Again, we have this thing called a puppet hospital. So if she breaks and malfunctions, don't worry, we have every single body piece ready to replace so she could keep going. And lastly, I mentioned this before, but Self actually has 9 expressions throughout the whole film. And what we do is that each animator basically gets a box of faces, which is the top box on the right that says Pixar, Self Faces. And right underneath is her eyelids, and her eyelids are literally the size of fingernail clippings. And then you have a finished puppet 4 months later. Isn't she beautiful? Yay!
So while all that is happening, what my job is to make sure all the plates are spinning and all the balls in the air, because we need to keep moving forward. So that includes building a year-long, week-by-week schedule that basically tracks all our progress to make sure that we are still within our budget and that we are still on our proper timeline to finish the film. And that big crazy board right there, well, that's what I like to call my big board or my brain dump. And basically what I take is everything that I know, everything that's going on about the film, and I just throw it onto this board. And the reason I do that is because it allows every single member of our crew to come into our production office and they can see, okay, here's everything I need to know about the film. Here's everything that we've done. Here's everything that we're in progress on. And then here's everything that's still to come. So it keeps everyone all in lockstep. I guess the other question is, all right, so what are the computer artists doing while we're building the puppets and doing all this other stuff and getting it set up? They're eating donuts because everyone loves donuts. Old fashioned, those are my people. Stick with the old fashioned. It's the best donut ever. All right, so they're doing more than just eating donuts. They're actually building the rest of the world that's going to bring up Self. And so that contains 2 sets and our secondary characters. So for our City Plaza, we used reference photos in addition to hand-drawn sketches that we did on our own to kind of map out the entire city. And this was done not only to populate all the buildings and the trees and kind of figure out where those were all going to be positioned. It also allowed us to kind of figure out, okay, where is Self going to be? How are we going to adjust her throughout the film? Where are we going to move her to? But it also allowed us to kind of figure out, where's the sun going to be? So we could position the sun properly in the sky to get the right lighting. And with Self being a wooden puppet, we really wanted to lean into the differences between her and the world that she was entering into. Self is she's an organic matter. She's wood. She is a more flat matte-like color. So she's coming into this world that is fully digital. So she's completely different from it. And we wanted to have that be reflected in the way that she was, the surroundings of her are all metal and they're highly, highly reflective. So we would take buildings from our previous films like Incredibles 2 and Soul and Turning Red, and we would use that to kind of save time and some resources to move our film forward. And the result is a beautiful city that looks like that. And for our rooftop, that's our second set, as you can kind of tell, it's for our more quieter scenes where it's just Self on her own. But we still needed to really have like a really well thought out plan for this, because we need to know not only where all the like things like air conditioning units and ducts and all that kind of stuff was going to be placed and set dressed on top of the rooftop, but we really needed to know where were we going to position Self on these rooftops. And we did something called a layout test shot. And so the reason why we did this layout test shot was to kind of figure out where could we position Self so that she would get clearly seen and not get lost amongst the skyline and all the set dressing behind her.
So if you notice in the film, Self is not the only character on screen. There's these secondary characters all around her. And internally, we're calling them Goldies because they look like gold. But that kind of idea for them is that they need to look like the opposite of Self. So like tall, sleek, smooth, and super shiny. And they even communicate differently from Self. And it's important to me to not have the Goldies come across as mean towards Self. I really want to focus more on like microaggressions and instead of like these big macroaggressions when someone doesn't feel like they belong, because the microaggressions are the things that people don't see and can't like comprehend. In this story, you see how these very small moments escalate someone to kind of make like big kind of life-changing decisions on themselves. So the choice to make them gold was kind of also another way to visually show that Self is differently from them. So some of you guys might be asking, why is Self a wooden doll? What is that about? So the reason why we decided to do that was because I personally wanted to have, again, because she's a character, an immigrant woman from Africa, I wanted her to feel earthy and like earth made and something handmade too, which is why I was like leaning towards wood material. And also the fact of like, you know, in Ethiopia, we have like crosses that we always put around our necks, and those crosses are also made out of wood. And to kind of contrast that, I wanted the other characters to be the exact opposite. So think like plastic, manufactured, fake. We really wanted them to be a different visual style and look than Self, because when I think about my mom, when she moved to LA, like no one really looked like her. And I think that kind of like helped again show this story visually, like how Self did not fit in with these groups of people. Some of the inspirations of the Goldies was just like, you know, Black Barbie dolls, to be honest. There's like another element of like, you know, I'm Ethiopian American, but I have a hard time, you know, fitting in with the Black community because I feel like I'm not Black enough at times, but at the same time, I have a hard time fitting in with the Ethiopian community because I don't speak my culture's language. And I kind of wanted that element in the story too, even if it's not something that's so forefront. But I think personally for me, like, I think there's something about like, even though I kind of look like both cultures, there's still kind of like a distance between those communities for me that was something I really struggled with when I was growing up. It's like the Three Stooges. So we have our sets and characters ready for production. We also had 3 puppets throughout the whole production of the film. And the reason why is because we have two stop motion animators and they each need their own puppet. Now, if something happens to their puppet while they're animating, we could send them the backup puppet to them so we could keep working while we send the broken puppet to the puppet hospital to again get fixed, be properly, any body parts need to be kind of replaced so that it could be again ready for production.
Yeah, so we started with stop motion animation first, and here's a crazy fact. Basically, on average, it takes us about a week to get maybe 5 to 7 seconds worth of usable footage. So we had 60 shots total for our film, and 19 of those shots were stop motion shots. So some shots would take as little as 1 day to do, but some shots took as much as 6 to 7 days to do. And unlike computer animation, where you can do shots over and over and over again until you get it just right, stop motion animation, you really get one chance per shot to get it right. So it's imperative you get it right the very first time just so you can stay on schedule. And then you'll see in one of those photos up there that says stage 2. We actually had 4 stages. So we had 2 stages that were shooting concurrently, and then we would have 2 other stages getting prepped for their very next shots. And that's because we had 2 stop motion animators, as Sadi mentioned. We had Gibby, and then we also had Chuck Duke, who is also just an incredible animator. And at their workstation, they got a couple of sheets that told them, okay, here's what shot you're working on, here's how long you have for the shot, and then here's a detailed diagram of how the puppet is constructed so that they can make manipulations to the puppet or make any small repairs. But as we mentioned, the puppet hospital was right around the corner in case anything did break. We had a bunch of spare parts and some extra faces there too.
She looks like a monster in that photo. I love it.
I know. And then for our more complex stop motion shots, we use something called a motion control camera. And these cameras were used especially whenever we needed to make any kind of large camera move. So we would program stuff like shot length, camera direction, camera speed, all into the camera so that it would create a nice smooth movement throughout the shot.
So when the footage was ready, as in when the animator has done their shot, they'll deliver that to Pixar so that we could see self in the digital world. And this is also another tricky challenge for the film because remember when Eric was showing you guys the Pixar pipeline? Well, we rarely use that pipeline. We actually had to make our own pipeline to kind of figure out like how to bring in the stop motion element to the CG space. And our VFX supervisor, Nathan, and our editorial team figured out a way for us to ingest all this footage into our pipeline so we could continue to work on the shots. So there was kind of like a healthy mix of fear and excitement every time we get like a new shot come in. And like here's an example of like a shot that we would get from Tippett. So we'll play it twice. So let's play it for the first time. So whenever, I think we mentioned this before that like, you could see that like in this shot, like Tippett has done like some cleanup. And you can even see it in the notes on this shot. The kind of idea is that like they removed the armature rig support or any tracking aspects and targets. And they also filled in her pupil eyes. And you must be wondering, like, what do you mean fill in her pupil eyes? Well, in order to have Self's eyes move, they had to drill a small hole in the center of our eye and use an X-Acto knife, like a really thin needle to move her eye to make it seem like there's movement. And depending on like the lighting where the camera is, you can see the holes. But when you see the shot again, like again, this is like a rough cleanup. If you notice on like the right side of her arm, you can still see the armature rig. And again, this is more of just like, hey, let's just have a sloppy, like quick slap look of what it would look like in the digital world. You guys see it? So while our stop motion animators are animating, our CG animators are also in parallel working at the same time. So some of the shots in the film are mimicking the stop motion animation. And what we did again, when we talked about the 9 facial expressions that we stuck with Self for the puppet, we also really follow that rule for her CG model as well. We had a very, very small animation team, and like we're very happy and like grateful because once we final all the computer animation and the stop motion animation, that's when we pass it to our lighting and compositing team. So this is like one of my favorite moments in the filmmaking process. So as a director, I love using the light and the color space to further like tell the story of the film. I don't believe like the story just ends after you lock the script or you lock the storyboards. Like every department, the production like pipeline is there to help support the story and elevate it and keep making it more specific. So for us, we really use the color space in the world to kind of represent self-emotional space throughout the whole film. So you notice like in the beginning of the film it was very warm and orange, or if you didn't notice it, feel free to watch it again on Disney Plus. But it's very warm and orange. And then when you see her on the rooftop and she is looking for the face, the world is very red because she's very manic and obsessive. Those are the kind of like fun elements that you could use to again further tell your story. Now, once our lighting team is like visually figuring that out, we also have our compositing team working too. So remember when we showed you the slap quick cleanup that Tippett did in that rig right here? Well, our compositors internally at Pixar is frame by frame getting rid of that rig and making it seem like clean up all the edges and outlines and making it seem like she was integrated in the digital world the whole time. Now, I know we threw a bunch of stuff at you guys. So here's kind of like a quick like visual mock-up of various stages to get the final frame. So in the first left corner is previs, which is kind of our layout, which is like very rough, like putting the characters as sets into space. Then the one on the right top side is me acting it out. So I actually acted out all the stop motion shots in the film because I wanted to, again, really make sure my animators knew what they wanted, but also it's an UGG because it's me acting and I'm not an actress. The stop motion animation is going to be the one in the bottom left. And that's where you're going to really just see, again, with the armature rig and the green screen, just the animation is really the focus in that one. And then once they send us the final animation, that's we get our lighting compositing team to clean it all up, which is the right bottom frame.
All right, so now that we got all our shots approved, yay, we're on to our final step, which is post-production. And so this is where the world of music kind of comes into play. And everyone knows music is a huge, huge component of making a movie. And so our score was composed and performed by this amazing artist right here, Jennifer Rowenkamp. And Jennifer performed a score on her cello as well with support from Veronica Toledo, who's one of our associate music editors here at Pixar, and she supported her on harp. And so we captured a little bit of Jenny's performance. Then that was all handed over to this guy over here. This is Sam Lermer, and Sam was our sound mixer and sound designer, and he brought all those elements of Jenny's score, and then he also took all the elements that he had created in terms of his sound effects and mixed them all together on that huge mixing board that has a lot of knobs and dials that I was always very nervous to touch. And he definitely put everything together and it just layered it beautifully across the entire film to create the final touches for Self. So, and this is our good friend, Catherine Serafian, who was our executive producer and champion of our film. So we have a nice little photo of us all together.
And that's the end of the presentation. I just want to say thank you guys for, first of all, watching a short film, letting us share the behind the scenes. And yeah, now we can open up the Q&As.
Yeah, let me stop my share and then you can see us.
Great. Thank you guys so much for sharing all that. It was super interesting to see the process, the stop motion combined with the animation process and how you kind of manipulated the usual pipeline to make it your own. I just think that's so fascinating. The film is beautiful. It's so powerful. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank
All
you.
right, I will jump into our Q&A. We have a lot of questions, which is awesome. I'm going to get through as many as I can. So this first question is from Sahar. What challenges did you face as a female filmmaker from a diverse background while working on this project in a high-profile studio with an established visual aesthetic and narrative style? And what support did you have to tell your story?
Yeah, I think the biggest I don't want to say disadvantage, but like I think like just like going back to talk about her hair and like I think I love our public construction team, but I think there was like a little bit of like concern of like I don't think we could do those braids that tight and like me like I'm someone who really loves to collaborate, but I think like just culturally me have to explain why having it that style is important was something where like yeah I think like as a black woman or someone from a specific culture and you're talking to like majority room full of white men of like why this is important, sometimes it's hard because you're really hoping they understand and could kind of put the connections of it. And I'm really happy that my team was like really understanding and really able to kind of comprehend and understand the importance of why it needs to be specifically that. But I do have to say I did get a lot of support. Like one, Eric is also a POC, so that's also great. It's just like you have two POC, leaders on this film. So it's not like I wasn't primarily alone, but we also really lean in our inclusion and strategies and team and Pixar, especially when it came to like getting those tattoo markings. We had like a tattoo like a historian do research for us just to make sure we're accurately portraying that. And then we also had a Respectability, which is a consulting group for the entertainment business industry to kind of consult on like any like storylines or characters that have to do with disability.
That's so cool. As you were going through this presentation, I just kept thinking about how much attention to detail there is throughout, and like the consulting group and the inclusion group and all those, the tattoos, all these like little details. It's just so thoughtful. All right, our next question is from Camille. And by the way, feel free both of you to just jump in, whoever it most applies to. Where did you get the idea for this particular style of animation, and what were your references and inspirations?
Yeah, I think like inspiration kind of I want to say came from Tippett. I think like we CG animation, and I'll speak to specifically at Pixar, it's animated in ones and they're super smooth and slick. And what we love about stop motion is that like it's like an imperfect art form where like not everything's in ones, things could be in twos and threes, but the audience is really forgiving of that because of the aesthetic of the style. So we really leaned on Tippett. It was actually really funny because when they were first showing us, giving us shots, we actually asked them like, hey, this is actually kind of looks like CG. So if we can, we hate saying this, but can you just make it look a little more sloppy? Which is like, was it sloppy, Eric? I don't know how we described it.
Yeah,
Like,
it was a really funny conversation to have. We're just like, just make it more choppy. Like we really wanted to lean into the stop motion of it all, mostly because it wasn't just to like, oh, hey, cool, look, we're doing something in stop motion. The purpose of it was actually all story driven. And every decision that we made on the film was all story driven. It's like, does this help the story? Does this accentuate the story? And Saudi she had such a great eye for that and just trying to kind of figure out, okay, this is going to help me tell my story. How can I weave this in? And then and also it's fun to play with puppets too. I mean, you can't go wrong with that.
yeah.
Totally. Well, it makes it so unique. This next question is from Danny. She says, first of all, lovely film, great achievement to get it done, especially in stop motion, big labor of love. I wanted to ask, why stop motion? Was it instrumental for the storytelling?
Stop motion because I studied it at UCLA, so I wanted to kind of go back to my roots and do a stop motion film. And again, like I don't like using stop motion just to use stop motion. Like everything has to go back to the story. So the story was about someone who was struggling to fit in and belong. So it's like not only can she not talk like them, not only can she like doesn't look like them, but she's also animated differently for them. And I think when we pitched the idea to executives, they're like, yes, this sounds good. Like let's do this. So that was kind of like the main core reason why we did stop motion.
I love it. It's, it's like this classic form of animation that you've updated. So it's really cool. This next question is from Hazel. Thank you for sharing this film. Can you say more about the choice of materials for the characters?
Oh,
Well, I think we wanted to kind of we wanted to make the puppet look as close to wood as possible without actually having to make a wooden puppet. We toyed with that idea for like, I don't know what, Saudi, like 5 minutes before we realized trying to hand carve these puppets to do what we wanted them to do is going to be it's going to take a little bit of a minute to do that. So we were like, all right, how do we do this? How do we dig into the materials that would allow us to really express that she was a wooden puppet? What kind of materials would allow us to allow us to get the rich tone of her color and to be able to see all the wood grain in there. And so we were also trying to think about ways that we could also use those materials to help kind of blend her in easily into the digital world. And so that was a huge component of it. Like, but also kind of showcase the handcraftedness of the stop motion puppet and how, there's elements where you can see it's just like, I love how you can see the fuzz on the clothes. It's like, it's just such a fun little detail. And so we really wanted to showcase those kinds of things.
mm-hmm.
Great. And this is from Daniel. What made you decide to pursue animation? I assume for both of you.
Yeah, I wanted to do it. I don't know. I think it just stems from like childhood. I think I was really into anime and like watching anime and reading mangas. And I think that I just I just had such a it just made me feel good. But I also was not into drawing. Like I was not one of those girlies who are like, yeah, I just sketch in my sketchbook all day. I hate I'm just not. And I say that because I think I love saying that because not because I don't like drawing, but I think that I know there's people there who loves animation, but they can't draw and they feel like that's the only way you can do animation. And that's not true. So I say this in pride of I don't draw, but I'm still able to direct and write for animation. And I again, I really love the storytelling element and being able to create and build worlds. And that's something that animation medium does really well.
Yeah, I got into it mostly because I had always done live action films. That's what I went to school for. That's what I started doing right after I got out of school. And when I got hired at Pixar, I was always I had this little bit of fear in me. I was just like, they're gonna find out I have no idea how to make an animated movie. And so it was really on Incredibles where I learned how to make a movie or how to make an animated movie. So I was just I was just trying to learn as much as I could. But I mean, I had loved animation since I was a kid of just, the stop motion stuff, but just watching all the classic cartoons of, Tom and Jerry and Heckle and Jekyll and all that other stuff. And I just loved all that stuff. And so it was just another form of storytelling to me. So I really want to kind of to stay in there and stay a part of it. And then when this opportunity came up and I heard about Saudi's film and I was like, yeah, I want to be a part of this. And they were just like, well, it's stop motion. And I was like, all right, well, I've never done stop motion before either. Okay, let's do it. Let's try it because if it works, fantastic. If it doesn't work, then at least I get to learn something and I tried it. So I think that's the beauty of stop motion or about animation just in general and why I wanted to go into it is because you get to genre blend so many different kinds of things. Like animation can be tell so many different kinds of stories and it's just a really fun environment to be in as well.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Our next question is from Rachel. What gave you the courage to share such a personal story about your life? Was there any point you questioned how vulnerable you wanted to be during the process of making the film?
I always knew I wanted to tell a story about someone who self-sabotaged herself to belong. I knew that was kind of the core of it. And I weirdly enough, I wasn't shy about expressing this story as personal to me, but I also think I kind of created some degrees of like separation. I'm someone who doesn't believe I need to do something that's so like autobiographical about my life. I think like I love like when I watch this film, the emotions that the character goes through is just something like that's so close to personal, but like, I have never literally ripped my hand off and put on another hand. Which I think again, like this is why I love the animation medium. Like you could really kind of push visually how you want to express these feelings. So yeah, I wasn't really shy about it, but again, I kind of created some barriers, so I wasn't really going like too deep.
It's very poetic, the whole thing. Um, our next question is an anonymous one. Do you have any
Ooh.
advice?
I don't know why I thought of the Sailor Moon guy.
Oh.
What's his name? Damn it, Tuxedo Mask. I don't know
Tuxedo
why
Mask,
immediately that
yeah.
image came up. Let's just call it Tuxedo Mask. Tuxedo
Yeah.
Max.
Okay, Tuxedo Mask. Mask says, do you have any advice for someone trying to get into Pixar or any animation studio as a production assistant?
Yes. The biggest one is that I wish I had this when I was in college. There are so many like groups and organizations to kind of help people, especially people who are in underrepresented communities, whether you're queer or like you're a person of color or like a woman. There's just so many more organizations that kind of are helping with that gap to get more people from different backgrounds into animation. So like some of the big ones that I really like to share and talk about is there's an organization called Women in Animation. I'm not sure Tuxedo Max if you're a man or a woman, but there's Women in Animation that is just so great because there's mentorship programs there to kind of get people who are actually in the industry to talk to people who are not. And there's also like a group that I personally love is called Black and Animated, which is specifically a Black organization within animation. And again, be able to connect with people in the industry.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things is really just internships and trying to find internships as much as you possibly can. That's a great way to get
Yeah.
in the door. And the internship can be, if it's with the Pixar, that's amazing. If it's with the Sony or whoever else, that's incredible. But even if it's an internship at a really small studio or with just a internship with the local artist or something like that, it helps build that experience. It helps build so much. And really, I think if this is a line of work that you want to kind of follow, it's uh, passion. Just keep creating, just keep doing it, just keep going, keep making stuff, because that's how you're going to get better. That's how you're going to learn more about yourself and what kind of stories you want to tell. And you just got to keep that passion up.
Great advice. Thank you both. Our next question is from Melissa. When she became partly gold, was she still a stop motion character or did you combine them?
We combined. So when she first has her hand on, it's still stop motion. And it depends on like, we say this a lot, like, depending on your eye level, like I would say eye level, but like, depending on how like closely you watch her movements, you could see how she's becoming like less and less choppy through that montage where she has more pieces and she's becoming more slick as she's on ones. So like when we had the hand, we actually had like a hand tracker there to put the CG golden hand on her stop motion puppet. So yeah, to answer your question, yeah, she was going from legitimately from stop motion to CG.
So cool.
Yes. So one of our tricks, I noticed this question in my little side panel here, and I was like, "Oh, I hope we get to answer this one because it's always so fun to see where people know." Because as Sadia had mentioned, with stop motion, we intentionally made her a little bit more choppy, and then as she progressed, you see her become smoother. But what we had done is the stop motion puppet, we took off one of the hands and we took off the hands and we put these three little prongs that stick out. And these are our motion trackers. And so we would know, okay, where's the hand going to be? And then we would animate the hand afterwards on top of where the wooden hand should be that's where the gold hand was, because the gold hand was all CG. And so it would start to move around. Now, when it started getting to when she transforms, like starts putting the legs on, if you go back and watch the film again, there's a shot where she reaches forward and she starts to pick up the leg. And what happens is the leg comes forward and it kind of goes over the screen and goes up like this. That's a wipe that we used as a way to kind of clear the frame. And then from there, she became a CG character completely. And so that was also a tell for us to be like, all right, this is our last stop motion shot. And then from there on, she moved in to be a completely digital model. So it's a fun little tip and trick.
So
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, hearing this whole process, I think is just so interesting because it's very unique. Our next question is from Gilly. What informed your choices of sounds for Self versus the other characters?
Yeah, that's a great question because I literally had no idea what I was doing when I decided to have the dings be incorporated in the story. It was kind of like we had a story edit session and we were like, what is that thing? And I think someone pitched, what if she just sounds differently? I'm like, great, perfect. And then we talked to our sound designer and he's like, so what is the sound? And I was like, I have no idea. So he actually just like, I love Sam, bless him, his patience. He like pulled out his keyboard and just like one key at a time was like, how about this? How about this? And, like I love filmmaking because it's a collaborative process. So like everyone in the room were kind of like chiming in ideas and things. And what we kind of come to the realization was that when there's like a higher pitch, there's something that feels more inviting versus like a lower pitch. So we slowly tried to create like a box of rules for the sound. And I knew personally, like I didn't want it to feel like a musical. I didn't want it to compete with the score. I should feel more casual conversation. And once we kind of had those kind of like big things down, Sam really took kind of leaned in and was like, okay, let me with those like notes and ideas kind of like see what we can do. So it was definitely like a lot of conversation. And like another thing too is just like the rhythm, how often they tap themselves was also just like something we were like also talking about too, because we wanted to make sure that the movement made sense for the kind of sound that was coming off of it as well.
Saudi, can remind me who was it that I remember that session that you're talking about? Was it you or Jenny that came up with the idea of giving everyone a notepad, and then we were listening to to the tones as he was playing them?
Yeah.
We all blindly wrote down which tones that we liked, but we didn't share it with anyone until the end of the meeting.
I think it was Jenny's idea, or maybe Sam's
Yeah.
idea. Sam always gave me like a notepad and a pencil to just write down. Like he'll just play so many different variations and he just like write down the ones you like so that we could like slowly like narrow the box. So it could have been a combination of Sam and Jenny.
Yeah, and because I just thought it was really interesting and really fun because we would start to a couple of us were doing it in the room where we would all write down on this notepad, not show each other, and then at the end of the meeting we would kind of put all these papers together, and then we would be like, oh, we all circled 2 and 14 and 36 or whatever it was. And then we're like, all right, so these other ones, let's maybe start to kind of move them out and let's focus on these like 3 or 4 tones because we all were gravitating towards them, which I thought was a really brilliant idea of how to kind of narrow that sound down.
Yeah.
Very collaborative. Our next question is another Tuxedo Mask anonymous question.
Yeah. The tuxedo mask.
When you get an idea or something that compels you to create an artwork or film, what are some of the first steps?
I usually always start with like a journal. I like for every like story or film I have, I kind of just have a journal where I could like write down my thoughts or feelings about a certain I don't like to write in themes per se, but I do like to write like from an idea or like an emotion. So for me, like I wanted to like Self was really great because Self was very like it came out really quick. I'm like, oh, I want to tell a story about someone who self-sabotaged herself to fit in. Like that was kind of like the big idea. But what I try to tell people is that to make sure to differentiate what's an idea and a story, because when you treat an idea like a story, you could quickly kind of just like feel discouraged because an idea is just an idea and there's not really a fullness of like a character arc or like a like act 1, 2, and 3. So it's also very fragile versus a story has like that meat, like the story, like the ideas multiple ideas in it. So like what I like to do just to not like kind of like feel discouraged is that I try to at least fill in the whole journal before I really start writing the story, because I feel like I will have more encouragement to keep going if I have like a book full of ideas or thoughts versus just like going off with that one thing.
That's great advice. Thank you. Our next question, and actually I think we're about out of time. These questions have been great, so thank you all. So this is gonna be our last question of the night. This is from Claire. How long have you been wanting to tell this story?
I want to say, well, the production of the film took 2 years, like a little under 2 years, but I want to say maybe under 3 years, because when I was given the opportunity to do it, I was actually working on my other live action film. So there was also a sense of like, I want to do this, but not right now. So I kind of like push the offer to later in a year. And it also kind of helped me just like ideate. So I want to say like 3 years.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to the audience for these wonderful questions as well.
Yeah, really great questions. Thank
Yeah,
you,
awesome
everyone.
questions. Thank you, everybody.
Lovely. Well, thanks for joining and putting together such a wonderful presentation as well. And just a couple announcements for our audience. Even though we've resumed in-person programs, we are still continuing to roll out exciting virtual programs like these. So don't forget to sign up for our e-news and follow us on social media for the latest announcements, and visit our website calendar at waltdisney.org/calendar for a current schedule of offerings. Members of the museum get the scoop and priority access to all of our programming, including virtual programming, and extended access with our members only portal, where we host recordings of all of our free virtual programs like this one. So visit us at waltdisney.org/donate to help support all of our virtual programming through either donations or membership. Thank you so much again for joining this evening, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks
Thank
again,
you.
everybody. Appreciate it.
Bye.